A gray-blue scarf trembled in a child's hands as a Boston blizzard howled outside the Frostline Grand. When the girl begged the tech CEO not to go upstairs, she saved his life. The Frostline Grand Hotel towered like a glass fortress against the storm. Snow spiraled past the revolving doors as Evan Drayton stepped inside, shaking the frost from his Italian coat. He was 38, polished, brilliant, the CEO of Neurocore AI, a company designing neural systems to predict climate disasters. His name filled magazines. His eyes, a piercing blue, hid the exhaustion of a man who had built empires from sleepless nights. The lobby was nearly empty except for a hotel pianist playing Clair de Lune. A chandelier swayed slightly in the draft from the storm. Guests murmured at the front desk, but near the far velvet chairs by the fireplace, a small figure caught his attention. A girl, no more than 7, sat alone, bundled in a faded pink coat. Her boots were wet, her hands trembling around a gray-blue wool scarf, frayed at the ends. It looked far too large for her, as if it belonged to someone else, someone older, someone gone. She clutched it like it was a lifeline. Evan slowed his stride. He wasn't a man who noticed children. His world was boardrooms and data streams. But there was something in her stillness that made him pause. Her eyes, wide, frightened, searching the revolving doors every few seconds, cut through the noise of his thoughts. Before he could decide why he cared, the elevator chimed, calling him to his meeting upstairs. He adjusted his cufflinks and turned, until he heard a small, trembling voice behind him. "Please, sir, don't go up there." He froze. The words were soft, urgent. He turned back slowly. The girl had stood up now, her scarf dragging across the marble floor. Her face was pale, lips cracked from the cold. "You can't," she whispered. "The men upstairs. They said—" She trailed off, her breath catching. Evan crouched to her level, his voice gentle. "What did they say?" Her fingers twisted the scarf tighter. They were in the cafe. 2 men. They were speaking in Russian. Her eyes darted toward the elevator. They said, "The rich man will disappear before noon." A chill that had nothing to do with the weather slid down Evan's spine. "You understood them?" She nodded. "My grandma was Ukrainian. She taught me. I didn't mean to listen. But they said your name." Evan's mind raced. Neurocore's encryption system had just been patented that week. Billions were at stake. And this morning's meeting, an investor conference on the 15th floor, included several new faces his assistant hadn't fully vetted. "Where's your mother?" he asked. "She's cleaning the top floors," the girl said, voice trembling. "She said to wait here, but—" Her small chest rose and fell in panic. "But I'm scared." The pianist hit a wrong note, startling them both. The lights flickered once, twice. The wind outside howled harder. Evan stood, scanning the lobby. Every instinct he'd honed as a CEO, the pattern recognition, the micro-expressions, the subtle awareness of when something didn't add up, told him this wasn't a child's imagination. He stepped toward the elevator, then stopped again. He could hear her words replaying in his mind. "The rich man will disappear before noon." He turned to the concierge. "Cancel my meeting," he ordered, his tone sharp and final. "Now, and call security." Moments later, chaos broke through the calm. 2 officers stormed the 15th floor. Minutes after that, word came down. Arrests made, laptops seized, false investor credentials uncovered. The men had been hackers, planning to copy Neurocore's design prototype and vanish before the hour struck noon. When the news broke, reporters called Evan a genius, a hero. But he knew better. He looked across the lobby where the girl sat again, hugging her scarf like armor. The hotel lights shimmered off the snow outside, painting the room in cold silver. She had saved him. And as he knelt before her again, meeting her tearful eyes, a question formed in his chest. One that would follow him long after the blizzard cleared. "What's your name?" "Clara," she said quietly. He smiled faintly. "Clara, you just changed everything." The police sirens faded into the storm outside, leaving behind a hush that felt heavier than silence. Evan remained kneeling in front of Clara, studying the trembling girl who had just unraveled a plot that could have cost him everything. Clara's small fingers clutched the scarf tighter, as if the gray-blue wool held the world together. It looked handmade, the kind of thing a family passes down, the edges worn thin, the middle soft from years of use. He noticed the faint initials stitched near the fringe. R.E. "Clara," he said gently, "where's your mom now?" She pointed toward the service elevators. "She's cleaning the top floors. She said she'd come back after the rich people left." Her choice of words hit him. After the rich people left. It was said like a rule of survival. He stood and gestured to the front desk clerk. "Get her mother down here. Rachel Ellis, now." The clerk hesitated. "Sir, our staff is on rotation." "Now," Evan repeated, his tone sharp enough to cut through the air. Minutes later, a woman hurried into the lobby, still in her housekeeping uniform, her face flushed from exertion. Strands of dark hair escaped her bun, and her eyes, wide with fear, went straight to her daughter. "Clara!" Rachel dropped to her knees, pulling the girl into her arms. Her voice trembled with relief. "Sweetheart, I told you to stay put. Are you all right?" Clara nodded into her mother's chest, whispering, "I didn't mean to scare him, Mama. I just didn't want the bad men to hurt him." Rachel froze, her head lifting slightly. "Bad men?" Evan stepped forward. "Your daughter just prevented an attempted theft of confidential designs, and possibly something worse. Those men were arrested upstairs." She understood their language. Rachel turned slowly toward him, confusion and disbelief warring across her face. She did what?" "Her quick thinking saved my company," Evan said. "Maybe even lives." Rachel blinked hard. "Sir, I don't even know what to say." Evan looked at her then. Really looked. Her uniform was clean but worn, her shoes soaked from the snow, her hands chapped from hours of scrubbing chemicals. Yet her composure held, even as she stood in front of a man whose suit probably cost more than her month's salary. "You don't need to say anything," he replied quietly, "but you both should come with me." Rachel tensed. "We haven't done anything wrong." "I know," he said quickly, "but I think it's time someone made sure you got the credit you deserve." He led them to a corner of the lobby where cameras were already flashing. Reporters had gathered faster than snowflakes drawn by the commotion. Someone recognized Evan Drayton, and microphones began to appear. "Mr. Drayton, what happened? Was there a threat to Nuracor?" Evan glanced down at Clara, who shrank behind her mother's leg. "Not a threat," he said. "A warning. From someone who cared enough to speak up." He motioned to Clara, but she hid her face in her scarf. Rachel instinctively pulled her closer. "Sir," one reporter pressed, "who was it?" Evan smiled faintly. "Just a very brave little girl." Flashes erupted. The story spread like wildfire. Child prevents billion-dollar cyber attack. But when the cameras finally left, Rachel turned on him, her voice shaking but firm. "You didn't have to tell them it was her," she said. "We don't need attention." "I wasn't trying to give you attention," Evan said. "I was trying to give you respect." Her expression softened, but only slightly. "People like us don't get respect. We get replaced." Evan opened his mouth, then stopped. There were no words that could fix the truth in that sentence. Snow pressed against the windows like white noise. Outside, the world continued in chaos, but inside, the air held still. Clara leaned into her mother's side, eyelids drooping. "She's exhausted," Rachel said, brushing hair from her daughter's forehead. "She waited here all morning. I'll take her home now." Evan hesitated. "Let me give you a ride." "No," she said quickly. "We take the bus. It's fine." "Rachel," he said, surprising himself by using her name, "it's below zero out there. I insist." She exhaled, too tired to argue. "All right, just this once." As they stepped out into the night, Snow swirled under the streetlights, painting everything in a soft, ethereal glow. Evan opened the door of his black SUV and turned on the heat. Clara immediately curled up on the seat, clutching her scarf like a blanket. Rachel fastened her seatbelt, her hands trembling slightly. "You really don't have to do this." Evan glanced at her. "Maybe not, but I want to." She studied him, wary yet grateful. "Why?" He started the engine, the headlights cutting through the white blur of the storm. "Because sometimes," he said quietly, "the right person walks into your life when everything else is falling apart." Rachel turned to the window, hiding the emotion that flickered across her face. Behind them, the frost-lined Grand disappeared into the snow, its tower fading like a memory, leaving only the faint glow of the lobby where a gray-blue scarf had changed the course of a billionaire's life. The storm thickened into a wall of white. Snow fell in heavy sheets across Boston's frozen streets as Evan's SUV crawled forward through the night. The wipers beat rhythmically, smearing frost and light together into a hypnotic blur. In the back seat, Clara slept, her head resting against the window, the gray-blue scarf draped over her like a fragile blanket. Every few minutes, she murmured softly, and Rachel would turn around, tucking the scarf closer to her daughter's chin. Evan kept his hand steady on the wheel. "Where do you live?" "Dorchester," Rachel said quietly. "Off Geneva Avenue." He frowned. "That's a long drive in this weather." She gave a small, weary laugh. "It's a long bus ride, too." Evan didn't respond. The heater hummed, the only sound besides the muffled growl of the tires over snow. He stole a glance at her in the dim dashboard glow. Her hair, still damp from melted snow, framed a face that carried both beauty and fatigue. Her eyes were the kind that had seen too much and still found reasons to keep going. "You don't have family nearby?" he asked. "My parents passed a few years ago," she said. "Clara's father—" She paused, her voice catching. "He left before she was born." Evan nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," she said, staring out the window. "We've done fine on our own." The way she said "fine" made his chest tighten. He'd built companies from scratch, survived boardroom wars and mergers, but there was something about this woman's quiet endurance that unsettled him, something stronger than anything he could measure in profit or loss. A patch of ice made the car skid slightly. Evan gripped the wheel tighter. "You're right. It's dangerous out here." Rachel glanced at him. "You didn't have to do this, Mr. Drayton." "Evan," he corrected. "Evan," she said slowly, as if testing the sound of it. "You're used to saving the world with your technology. You didn't have to save us too." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I needed to." They fell silent again. The streets narrowed, the sidewalks buried in drifts. When they reached her apartment building, the sight hit him like a punch. The structure leaned tiredly under the weight of snow, its windows fogged and cracked. The neon sign above the door flickered weakly. Harbor View Apartments. Though the harbor was miles away. Rachel turned to him. "Thank you for the ride. I mean it." He nodded. "Do you have heat?" She hesitated, then forced a small smile. "Most nights, when the system doesn't cut out." Evan looked past her toward the frosted stairwell. "Wait here a moment." Before she could protest, he stepped out into the storm. He trudged around to the back of his SUV, retrieved a small emergency kit, and carried it toward her building. Flashlight, space heater, a sealed blanket pack. Rachel followed him up the steps, clutching Clara's hand as the girl stirred awake. Inside, the hallway was dim and cold. The hum of the old boiler sounded like a dying heartbeat. Evan's breath turned visible in the air. "You shouldn't be here," Rachel said softly, setting Clara's coat on a hook. "You're not exactly built for this place." He glanced around the peeling walls. "Maybe it's exactly where I need to be." Rachel blinked, unsure what he meant. Clara yawned, curling up on the couch. "Mama, the lights are flickering again." "I know, sweetheart." Rachel pulled her daughter close, then turned to Evan. "You should go before the storm traps you." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but Rachel," he met her eyes. "You and Clara. If you ever need anything, call me." She crossed her arms. "I don't take charity, Mr. Drayton." "This isn't charity," he said softly. "It's gratitude." She held his gaze a moment longer before nodding. "Good night, Evan." Outside, the wind screamed against the windows as he returned to his car. Through the glass, he could see Rachel kneeling beside her daughter, adjusting the scarf around her shoulders. The sight lodged in his chest. He drove away slowly, headlights carving a lonely path through the white. The world beyond the windshield seemed swallowed by snow, but somewhere in the quiet, something inside him shifted. A thaw, beginning where he hadn't realized he'd been frozen. At a red light, his phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. "Crisis averted. Press calling you a hero. Shall we issue a statement?" Evan stared at the glowing screen. His reflection looked back at him. Tired, hollow, lost. He typed only 2 words before shutting it off. "Not yet." Then he glanced once more in the rearview mirror at the flickering light of Rachel's apartment, the faint blue of the scarf in the window. He didn't know why, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his life, built on logic and precision, had just been quietly rewritten by a child in the middle of a blizzard. The morning after the storm, Boston lay buried under white silence. Snowdrifts walled in the sidewalks. The city's heartbeat was muffled beneath ice. From his penthouse office overlooking the harbor, Evan Drayton stood before the window, coffee cooling in his hand, the skyline a blur of gray. The world was already calling him a hero. News anchors praised his quick instinct. Investors hailed his leadership, and Nuracor's stock price had spiked overnight. But none of it felt real. He hadn't been the hero. A little girl in a frayed scarf had been. He set the mug down and pressed his fingers to his temples. The image of Clara, her trembling voice, her fear, wouldn't leave him. A knock came at the door. His assistant, Mara, slipped in. "You're supposed to be on a live segment with CNBC in 15 minutes. The narrative's strong. You caught the threat before it happened." Evan interrupted quietly. "I didn't catch it, Mara. Someone else did." Mara frowned. "Sir?" He turned, voice low but firm. "Cancel the interview." Her jaw dropped. "Evan, the board wants visibility. You saved a multi-billion-dollar prototype. You can't just—" "Cancel it," he repeated. She hesitated, then nodded and slipped out. Evan exhaled slowly, turning back to the window. He had spent years building Nuracor into a symbol of control, an empire of algorithms and data that could predict chaos before it struck. Yet the one thing that had saved him hadn't come from a forecast or a formula. It had come from a child who listened. He picked up his coat. Moments later, he was in the elevator, descending 30 floors to the street. The storm's aftermath had turned Boston into a sculpture of glass and frost. Cars were half buried. The air glittered with suspended ice crystals. He drove in silence toward Dorchester, toward the address Rachel had scribbled on the back of a hotel notepad. The building looked even rougher in daylight. He parked at the curb and carried a small bag inside. Groceries, hot soup, gloves, and something he'd found in his closet. A thick, woolen blanket in deep navy blue. When Rachel opened the door, surprise flickered across her face. "Evan? What are you doing here?" He held up the bag awkwardly. "Breakfast, and maybe an apology." "An apology?" "For letting the press make it about me." Her expression softened a fraction. "You didn't have to come all this way." "I did." Clara appeared behind her mother, still in her pajamas, hair sticking up like a halo of static. When she saw him, her face lit up. "Mr. Evan!" He smiled. "Hi, Clara." She ran forward and hugged his leg before darting back to grab the gray-blue scarf from the couch. "Mama fixed the tear," she announced proudly. Rachel sighed, embarrassed. She wouldn't sleep until it was mended. "It's a good scarf," Evan said gently. "It's strong." He handed over the grocery bag. "There's cocoa mix and a few things to help for the week." Rachel blinked, caught between gratitude and pride. "You really don't have to do this." "I know," he said quietly. "But I want to." He helped her set the groceries on the counter. The apartment was small, 2 rooms and a worn couch, but it was clean and smelled faintly of cinnamon and detergent. The heater rattled weakly in the corner, its hum uneven. As Rachel poured cocoa for Clara, Evan noticed a pile of textbooks stacked on the table. Language guides, old dictionaries, a children's workbook in Ukrainian. "She likes languages?" he asked. Rachel nodded. "She memorizes everything she hears. My mother used to speak Russian around her before she passed." Clara sipped her cocoa, leaving a chocolate mustache. "Grandma said words are bridges," she mumbled. "Even Snow listens if you talk kindly." Evan smiled. "That's a smart way to see the world." Rachel watched him quietly. "You don't talk like a man who runs a billion-dollar company." He chuckled. "Most people don't know how tired billion-dollar companies make you." She tilted her head. "Then why keep doing it?" He hesitated. "Because it's all I know." Clara climbed onto his lap, uninvited but perfectly natural. She held up her scarf. "You can borrow it when you're cold." Evan looked down, startled. "That's very kind of you." "It makes people brave," she whispered. "Mama says so." Rachel smiled faintly, eyes glistening. Outside, the wind had quieted. For the first time in years, Evan felt the strange, unfamiliar warmth of belonging. Not through success, but through something far simpler. He stayed until afternoon, helping Clara build a small fort of couch cushions while Rachel prepared soup. Before leaving, he pressed a small card into Rachel's hand. "If the heater fails again," he said softly, "call this number. It's my facilities manager. Tell him your family." Rachel stared at the card, speechless. "Evan, I can't." "You can," he said. "You already did enough for me." As he stepped back into the snow, the wind bit at his cheeks, but inside something felt warmer. He glanced up at the apartment window one last time and saw Clara wave, scarf flapping in the light. That night, as he returned to his quiet penthouse, the city's skyline reflected in the glass, Evan realized that the girl's words had settled somewhere deep inside him. Words are bridges. He didn't yet know how, but he was about to cross one that would change his life forever. Snow fell again 2 days later, blanketing Boston in silence. At Nuracore headquarters, screens glowed through the glass facade as news channels still replayed footage of Evan's heroic intervention. But inside his office, Evan's mind was elsewhere, on the small apartment in Dorchester, the smell of cocoa, the warmth of that gray-blue scarf, and the sound of Clara's laughter echoing in his ears. He sat at his desk, the city lights flickering beyond the window, and stared at a draft of the official press statement his PR team had written. Nuracore CEO Evan Drayton prevented a cyber attack through his innovative crisis response, demonstrating once again the leadership that defines the company's vision for safety and intelligence. He read the sentence twice, then deleted it entirely. It wasn't true. He hadn't prevented anything. Clara had. He picked up his phone and called his assistant. "Mara, I need to make an addition to the press statement." "What kind of addition, sir?" He hesitated. "A correction and a name." An hour later, the company's press release went public again. The new version led with a different story. A 7-year-old girl named Clara Ellis prevented a corporate sabotage attempt by warning our team. Her courage and quick thinking averted a crisis before it began. Nuracore will be establishing the Clara Ellis Education Initiative to support language and ethics programs for children in Boston. Within minutes, the media was flooded with new headlines. Nuracore CEO credits child hero. Reporters called her a prodigy. Online forums shared her photo, bright eyes, that wool scarf, a small hand clutching a cup of cocoa. Evan ignored his board's complaints about unnecessary publicity. Some said the story humanized him. Others said it made him look naive. He didn't care. Late that afternoon, he returned to the Frostline Grand Hotel to personally thank the staff for cooperating with the investigation. As he crossed the lobby, he overheard two managers arguing near the reception desk. "She caused a panic during a VIP conference," one said sharply. "We don't need that kind of liability. Her employment was temporary anyway." "She saved a man's life," the other muttered. "Still, it was a breach of protocol." Evan's stride slowed. He knew that tone, the quiet cruelty of people who'd never risked anything yet loved to punish those who did. "Excuse me," he said evenly, stepping between them. "Who are you talking about?" The manager stiffened. "Mr. Drayton, sir, we didn't see you there. We were just discussing—" "Rachel Ellis," Evan finished. "Your night cleaning staff." The taller manager swallowed. "Yes, sir. She disrupted hotel operations." "By saving my company?" Evan's voice dropped, quiet but lethal. "Fire her, and I'll make sure Frostline loses every Nuracore contract in this district." The color drained from the man's face. "That won't be necessary." "Good," Evan said. "Then you'll be giving her a raise instead." He didn't wait for an answer. Outside, the snow was turning to sleet as he got into his car. He thought about Rachel's exhaustion, her insistence on refusing charity, her quiet dignity. The weight of her world pressed against his conscience in a way no boardroom deal ever had. That night, he called Mara again. "Find out where Rachel Ellis works besides the hotel, and what school her daughter goes to." "Understood," she said, though her tone carried curiosity she didn't voice. Hours later, the report came in. Rachel worked 2 jobs, night cleaning at Frostline and part-time laundry at a small medical center. Their apartment rent consumed almost everything she made. Clara attended public school, top of her class, bilingual in English and Ukrainian, now learning French on her own. Evan stared at the datasheet long after the call ended. For years, he had built algorithms to predict human decisions, but none could explain why this mattered so much to him, or why he couldn't stop picturing that tiny gray-blue scarf. At dawn, he made a decision. He had his driver deliver 2 sealed envelopes, one to the Frostline manager, authorizing a full scholarship for Clara's education, the other to Rachel's landlord, paying her rent anonymously for the next 6 months. He didn't sign them. He didn't want thanks. He only wrote 1 line in each envelope. For the girl who spoke the language of snow. Later that evening, as he reviewed Nuracore's quarterly reports, Mara interrupted. "Sir, the Ellis family stopped by the lobby." He looked up sharply. "They're here?" "They said they wanted to thank you in person." Moments later, Rachel stepped into his office with Clara clutching her hand. Both were bundled in thick coats. Snow melted in their hair. Clara's eyes sparkled when she saw him. "You're on TV again," she exclaimed proudly. "Mama says they're talking about me too." Evan smiled. "They should. You're the reason Boston's still warm tonight." Rachel looked uncomfortable but grateful. "Mr. Drayton, I don't know what to say. The hotel gave me a promotion this morning. They said you—" He raised a hand gently. "I just reminded them of their priorities." She hesitated, then smiled softly. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said, "but sometimes doing nothing feels worse." Clara tugged at his sleeve. "Mama said I should give you something." From her pocket she pulled out a small folded paper snowflake, hand-cut, uneven, 1 corner missing. "It's for your office," she said, "so you don't forget the storm." Evan took it delicately, the fragile shape catching the office light. "I won't," he said quietly. As they turned to leave, his phone buzzed with another alert, an emergency board meeting. Another crisis, another round of damage control. But as he looked down at the snowflake in his hand, Evan made a silent promise to himself. Whatever the next storm brought, he would face it differently now. Not with walls of data and logic, but with something rarer, something he had learned from a little girl who spoke softly and carried a gray-blue scarf. The first rays of morning pushed weakly through the winter haze as Boston thawed beneath a gray sky. At Nuracore headquarters, the warmth of victory had already begun to cool. The boardroom buzzed with quiet tension, the air sharp with the scent of polished wood and burnt coffee. Evan sat at the head of the long glass table, his tailored suit crisp, his blue eyes shadowed by exhaustion. He had just returned from a press briefing, his mind still half in Dorchester, with the memory of a child's laughter and the faint smell of cocoa lingering in his thoughts. Across from him sat Miles Grant, his oldest friend and Nuracor's chief operating officer. Miles was a man of polish and precision, the kind who could sell a lie with a handshake. His salt and pepper hair and expensive smile made him the board's darling, but Evan had known him long enough to see through the charm. "Evan," Miles began, voice smooth as glass, "you've become a media sensation overnight, but giving credit to a child? That's not exactly strategic." Evan leaned back. "It was the truth." "The truth doesn't trend," Miles replied. "Optics do. Then maybe it's time we change what people think success looks like." The board members exchanged wary glances. Miles forced a thin smile. "You're letting sentiment cloud your judgment." Evan's gaze flicked up, steady and calm. "Sentiment saved this company, Miles." Silence rippled through the room. Someone coughed. Another shifted uncomfortably in their seat. Before Miles could answer, Mara entered, tablet in hand. "Sorry to interrupt, sir, but the Boston Herald just published an op-ed praising your transparency. Public response is overwhelmingly positive." Evan caught the flicker of irritation that crossed Miles's face. "Good," he said simply. Meeting adjourned. He left before anyone could protest. Downstairs, the lobby bustled with the rhythm of corporate life, heels on marble, phones buzzing, voices clipped with urgency. Evan paused near the revolving doors, catching sight of a newsstand headline, "The Girl Who Saved Nuracor." Beneath it, Clara's picture smiled back at him, scarf visible around her neck. For the first time in years, he smiled without calculation. That evening, unable to shake the thought of Rachel and Clara, he found himself driving toward Dorchester again. He told himself it was about gratitude, that he wanted to see how they were doing, but deep down it was something quieter, something that tugged at the hollow part of him success had never filled. The streets were still slick with melting snow, puddles reflecting amber streetlights. When he reached their building, he saw movement in the window. Rachel helping Clara with homework, both of them laughing over something he couldn't hear. It was a scene so ordinary, so warm, it made his chest ache. He almost turned the car around. But then Rachel looked up and saw him through the glass. She smiled faintly, then waved for him to come in. Inside, the apartment smelled of soup and detergent again. Clara jumped up from her seat. "Mr. Evan, you came back." "I did," he said, smiling. "I wanted to see how you two were doing." "We're okay," Clara said proudly. "Mama says I'm famous now, but we still have to wake up at 5 to catch the bus." Evan laughed softly. "Some things don't change overnight." Rachel gestured toward the table. "Would you like some soup? It's not much, but I'd love to." She poured him a bowl, steam curling upward like a small cloud. He noticed how her hands shook slightly, the exhaustion hiding beneath her composure. "You work too hard," he said quietly. She shrugged. "Work keeps you standing. And rest keeps you alive," he countered. Her eyes met his. "I don't have that luxury." For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of the radiator and Clara humming under her breath as she drew on a scrap of paper. Evan finally broke the silence. "You know, when I built Nuracor, I thought technology could solve everything. Storms, crises, disasters. But it can't fix loneliness. It can't fix the spaces we leave empty." Rachel tilted her head. "What made you realize that?" He looked at Clara, then back at her. A little girl in a scarf who refused to stay silent. Rachel smiled faintly, her eyes softening. She has that effect on people. When Clara finished her drawing, she ran to him and proudly held it up. It was crude but full of heart, a stick figure of him, her, and Rachel standing under falling snow. In the corner, she'd drawn the gray-blue scarf wrapped around all three. Avon's throat tightened. "This is beautiful, Clara. May I keep it?" She nodded eagerly. "It's us," she said, "because you helped us, and we helped you." He folded the picture carefully and slipped it into his coat pocket. After dinner, as he was about to leave, Rachel walked him to the door. "You really didn't have to come back," she said softly. "Maybe I did," he replied. "You have your own world, Evan. This isn't it." He paused in the doorway. "Maybe that's why I keep showing up here." Their eyes met, hers uncertain, his steady. The air between them hummed with something unspoken, fragile, real. Then Clara called from the table, breaking the moment. "Mama, my scarf fell again." Rachel smiled, shaking her head. "Coming, sweetheart." Evan stepped back into the cold. Snow had begun to fall again, soft, slow, quiet. He turned up his collar and looked back once more at the window, where Rachel and Clara's silhouettes glowed in the warm yellow light. He realized then that the scarf wasn't just a symbol of warmth. It was a thread, one that had begun to stitch his life back together. And somewhere deep inside, beneath years of ice and ambition, something began to melt. The next morning, Boston glistened under a pale sun, the storm clouds finally retreating. But inside Nurakor's sleek tower, the atmosphere was far from calm. Evan stood before a wall of monitors in his glass office, watching as headlines scrolled across one screen, each one more sensational than the last. From janitor's daughter to hero, who is Clara Ellis? The little girl who outsmarted hackers. Nurakor CEO credits 7-year-old for saving the company. It should have felt like victory. Instead, unease coiled in his chest. Clara's photo, her innocent smile and that gray-blue scarf, was everywhere. She didn't belong to this world of scrutiny and noise. She deserved quiet, not cameras. He picked up the phone. "Mara, call every outlet that's using the girl's name without permission. Pull the photos. Replace them with the company logo." "Already on it," she said. "But Evan, people are curious. It's becoming a national story. Investors are calling this your human moment. The board's thrilled." He didn't answer. The board's thrill meant little now. He had other things on his mind, like the sound of Rachel's voice saying, "We've done fine on our own." That night, he drove through the narrow streets of Dorchester again, this time with a box in the passenger seat, 2 thick coats, new boots for Clara, and a small, wrapped parcel. His headlights cut through the mist as he parked in front of their building. Rachel opened the door, surprise flickering in her tired eyes. "Evan?" He lifted the box slightly. "Just a few things. I hope I'm not intruding." Her gaze softened, though her posture remained guarded. "You're always intruding, but you bring good things, so I'll allow it." Clara appeared behind her mother, grinning. "Mr. Evan, I got an A on my language test." "That's wonderful, Clara." He crouched to her level. "Your teacher must be proud. She said I could be a translator someday, or a teacher like Grandma was." Rachel smiled faintly. "She has big dreams." "I'd say she's earned them," Evan said, "and maybe she could use a little help." He handed Rachel the parcel. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a tablet, lightweight, sturdy, preloaded with learning apps in English, Russian, and French. She looked up, startled. "Evan, this is expensive." "It's an investment," he said, "in someone who already saved more than I ever could." Rachel swallowed hard. "I don't like owing people." "You don't owe me," he said softly. "You've already given me something worth more than money." Her eyes met his, questioning. "And what's that?" He hesitated. "Perspective." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the radiator filling the small room. Clara had already curled up on the couch, the scarf around her shoulders, tapping excitedly on the tablet screen. "She's adjusting to the attention?" he asked quietly. Rachel shook her head. "Not really. I keep the TV off. She doesn't understand fame. She just knows she stopped something bad." Evan smiled faintly. "Maybe that's all anyone needs to know." Rachel glanced at him, her tone softer now. "You seem different lately." He let out a slow breath. Because for the first time in years, I'm seeing things that aren't on a balance sheet. Rachel studied him, the edges of her defensiveness melting. You're a good man, Evan. Just don't lose yourself trying to prove it. He looked at her for a long moment. Coming from you, that means more than you think. Before she could respond, the radiator sputtered, then went silent. The air grew cold almost instantly. Rachel sighed. Not again. Evan stood. Let me take a look. You? You run a tech empire, not a toolbox. He smiled, rolling up his sleeves. Turns out I can do both. After a few minutes of tinkering and rerouting the circuit breaker, the heater groaned back to life. Warm air filled the room again. Clara clapped from the couch. You fixed it. Evan grinned. Told you I could. Rachel laughed. A soft, genuine sound he hadn't heard from her before. You really are full of surprises, aren't you? Trying to be. He looked around the small apartment. The threadbare curtains, the chipped table, the flickering lamp, and something shifted quietly in his chest. These two had so little, yet the space radiated more warmth than his entire penthouse ever had. He rose, brushing the dust from his hands. All set. But if the heat cuts out again, call this number. He scribbled a direct line on a sticky note. Rachel hesitated before taking it. You don't give up easily, do you? Not when it matters. She nodded slowly. Then, thank you. For everything. He gave a small smile. You've already thanked me just by letting me in. Outside, the night was quiet again. Snow drifted gently through the lamplight, soft as falling ash. Evan paused beside his car, glancing back at the window where the faint golden glow framed Rachel and Clara sitting together on the couch. Inside, Clara's laughter floated through the frosted glass. Rachel reached over, tucking the scarf around her daughter's shoulders, the same scarf that had first brought them into his life. Evan stood there longer than he meant to, watching until the cold finally bit through his coat. Something inside him whispered that this simple warmth, was what he had been chasing all along, even without knowing it. And, for the first time in years, he didn't feel like the richest man in the room. Christmas Eve arrived with a heavy stillness that wrapped Boston in silence. The city glowed under strings of gold lights and reflections of snow. The air smelled faintly of pine and chimney smoke, and somewhere in the distance, church bells tolled across frozen rooftops. In the penthouse above the harbor, Evan Drayton sat alone at a table set for one. The city below sparkled like a circuit board, but inside, the light felt hollow. A half-eaten meal grew cold beside a glass of untouched wine. For the first time in his adult life, he hadn't attended a holiday gala. He'd canceled everything: the interviews, the fundraisers, the glossy magazine feature titled "The Man Who Outsmarted the Storm." He couldn't stomach the idea of being celebrated for something that didn't feel like his to claim. His phone buzzed with messages from colleagues. To a year of success, Evan. You've earned a break. Cheers to the legend. He said it face down. None of it mattered tonight. He stood by the window, watching the snow fall in the soft spirals over the harbor, and then, as if guided by instinct more than decision, he grabbed his coat. Half an hour later, he was standing in front of Rachel's building in Dorchester. The stairwell light flickered as he climbed, carrying a grocery bag filled with things he remembered from their last conversation: fresh bread, cocoa, and a small wrapped box tied with silver ribbon. He knocked once. The door opened to warmth. Rachel stood there in a worn sweater, her hair pulled into a loose bun, eyes widening when she saw him. Behind her, the faint glow of Christmas lights shimmered around a tiny artificial tree sitting on a crate. Clara was asleep on the couch, the gray-blue scarf tucked around her like a cocoon. "Evan," Rachel said softly, surprise and something gentler in her tone. "It's Christmas Eve." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm here." She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in, before you freeze." The air smelled of cinnamon and cheap cocoa mix. Evan set the bag on the counter. "I brought a few things. I didn't know if you'd have company." Her expression faltered for a moment. "We don't." It's just us. Then maybe tonight? It doesn't have to be. Rachel stared at him for a heartbeat too long, as if weighing what it meant to let him stay. Finally, she smiled faintly. All right, but you're washing your own mug. He laughed quietly, shrugging off his coat. The sound seemed to thaw something between them. Soon, they sat together on the couch beside the small tree. The heater hummed softly. Clara stirred once but didn't wake, her tiny hand gripping the edge of her scarf. Rachel handed him a mug of cocoa. No champagne here, she teased. I'll survive. They sipped in silence for a while, the kind of silence that felt earned, not awkward. Snowflakes drifted past the window, catching the light like falling stars. Evan glanced around the modest room, strings of lights taped unevenly to the walls, paper snowflakes cut out and taped to the fridge, a single wrapped gift beneath the tree. You made this place beautiful. Rachel smiled faintly. It's not much, but it's ours. He nodded slowly. You know, I spent years decorating bigger places, houses that looked perfect but never felt like home. She looked at him, brow furrowed. You don't strike me as lonely. I am, he admitted. But lately, I'm realizing that loneliness doesn't always mean being alone. Sometimes it means being surrounded by people who only see what you're worth on paper. Her gaze softened. And what do you think you're worth, Evan? He smiled faintly. Less than I thought. More than I deserve. For a long time, they just sat there, watching the snow. The city outside seemed far away, replaced by the hum of the heater and the sound of Clara breathing softly in her sleep. After a while, Rachel said quietly, She's going to remember this Christmas, you know. Because of the presents? He asked. No, she said. Because someone showed up. Her words hit deeper than she intended. Evan reached into his coat and handed her the small, silver-wrapped box. I was going to leave this for her to open in the morning, but maybe you should see it first. Rachel frowned slightly, unwrapping the ribbon. Inside was a locket shaped like a snowflake, its silver edges delicate but strong. When she opened it, she found a tiny engraving inside. Keep time, find home. Her breath caught. This was my father's saying. I know, he said softly. Clara told me. I had it inscribed for her. Her eyes glistened. You remembered? How could I forget? He said. It's the kind of wisdom that saves people. Rachel swallowed hard, blinking back tears. You didn't have to do all this. I wanted to, he said. You and Clara reminded me what it means to build something real. She looked at him for a long moment, her voice barely a whisper. You really are different, aren't you? Evan smiled faintly. Only because you made me see what mattered. The clock on the wall ticked softly toward midnight. Outside, the snow kept falling. Soft, relentless, pure. Rachel reached over and adjusted the scarf around Clara's shoulders. She'll be so happy in the morning, she murmured. Evan nodded. Merry Christmas, Rachel. She turned to him, her eyes bright with something unspoken. Merry Christmas, Evan. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man standing on top of the world. He felt like someone finally standing where he belonged. And, as the snow drifted past the window, he realized that warmth wasn't something you found. It was something you shared. The holidays passed, and Boston returned to its rhythm of gray mornings and hurried commutes. But inside Nuracor's glass tower, something subtle had changed. The air no longer felt sharp and sterile, it carried a trace of warmth, faint but unmistakable. Evan Drayton had always ruled through logic, not feeling. But lately, logic didn't quiet the unrest inside him. The more time he spent around Rachel and Clara, the less sense his old world made. He found himself replaying that Christmas Eve. Rachel's laugh, the light in her apartment, the quiet peace of cocoa and candlelight. He'd gone there as a gesture of kindness, but he'd left with something he couldn't name. Still, life at the top allowed little room for softness. On a Monday morning thick with fog, Mara entered his office, her expression tight. Sir, we have a problem. Evan looked up from his laptop. Go on. It's the finance division. A series of unauthorized withdrawals. Small, subtle, spread across multiple accounts. He frowned. How small? 50,000 total so far, but it's deliberate, layered through shell invoices. He stood slowly. Who signed off? Mara hesitated. Miles. Evan's pulse ticked faster. Miles Grant, his co-founder, his oldest friend, the man who'd stood beside him when NeuroCore was just a dream sketched on a napkin. He leaned against the desk, exhaling hard. Are we sure? I triple-checked. It's his clearance code. Evan pressed his hand to his forehead. God. Mara's voice lowered. If this goes public... It won't, he said sharply. Not until I know the truth. When she left, he sank into his chair, staring at the skyline. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he opened a private security channel on his laptop and began reviewing data logs himself. Each transaction lined up too perfectly. The pattern wasn't carelessness, it was betrayal. By evening, the office was dark except for the city lights outside. Miles appeared in the doorway, smiling the same easy smile that had fooled investors and partners for years. You look like hell, Evan. Long day? Evan kept his voice even. Sit down. Miles chuckled. That bad? Worse. He tossed a file across the table. You want to tell me why $500,000 is missing from research escrow accounts? Miles's smile flickered, then returned, brittle at the edges. Come on, Ev. It's accounting noise. Cross-departmental mislabeling? Don't insult me. Evan's tone was quiet but razor-sharp. I built those systems. Every cent moves with a fingerprint, and yours are all over this. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the HVAC system. Miles leaned back, his charm dissolving. You wouldn't understand. You've been too busy playing the benevolent hero, donating, sponsoring, rescuing janitors' kids, while I've been patching this company together behind the scenes. By stealing from it? Miles's eyes hardened. By surviving it. Evan felt something twist inside him. Rage, yes, but deeper than that. Grief. You were like a brother to me, he said quietly. We built NeuroCore together. Miles laughed bitterly. You built your legend, Evan. I just made sure the lights stayed on. Evan stood, the weight of years pressing against his chest. Get out. Miles's jaw clenched. You'll regret this. Not as much as I regret trusting you. The door slammed behind him, leaving silence that felt colder than any winter storm. Evan sank into his chair, staring out at the city, the glass reflecting his own hollow expression. Betrayal had a way of echoing. It didn't just break trust. It fractured identity. Hours later, he was still there when the phone on his desk buzzed. It was Rachel. He hesitated before answering. Evan? Her voice was soft but steady. You sound tired. He tried to smile. It's been a long day. You're not eating, she said matter-of-factly. I can hear it in your voice. He let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You can hear hunger? I can hear emptiness, she said. They sound the same. Her words landed like a whisper through glass. He rubbed his eyes. I found out someone I trusted betrayed me. I don't even know what hurts more, the money or the lie. Rachel was quiet for a moment. People who build walls forget they can trap themselves inside. He frowned. What does that mean? It means maybe you trusted him to keep you safe from the world when you should have trusted yourself instead. Evan leaned back, the tension in his shoulders unraveling slowly. You make everything sound simpler than it is. No, she said. You make it harder than it needs to be. He exhaled, letting the silence fill the line. Somewhere behind her voice, he could hear the faint sound of Clara laughing in the background, muffled by the hum of their heater. It grounded him. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For calling. Don't thank me, she said gently. Just promise me one thing. What's that? When the world starts freezing around you again, don't lock the door on people who care. He didn't answer right away, but when he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before. I won't. After they hung up, Evan stared out at the snow drifting past the glass tower. The betrayal still burned, but the ice around it had begun to crack, just enough for something warmer to slip through. And as the storm built again outside, he realized Rachel had been right all along. Sometimes, the only way to stay warm in winter was to stop standing alone. The next morning, the city awoke to a sharp wind that rattled windows and bit at bare skin. Boston looked fragile, streets glistening under a hard frost, trees glittering with ice like glass threads. Inside Nuracor Tower, Evan stood in the boardroom, framed by the pale skyline, while chaos brewed around him. Miles Grant's betrayal had detonated like a quiet bomb. Overnight, legal teams began untangling shell invoices, offshore transfers, and dummy accounts. News outlets were sniffing around. What had begun as small discrepancies was fast becoming a scandal. Mara entered the room, her usual composure cracked at the edges. "Evan, the auditors want a statement. Miles's lawyer is already trying to spin it as a misunderstanding." Evan didn't look up from the window. "It's not a misunderstanding. It's theft." Her tone softened. "The board's nervous. Some think you should distance yourself publicly. Say you didn't know." He turned, blue eyes steady. "I did know. Not soon enough, but I knew. And if I start lying to protect myself, I become him." Mara hesitated. "You can't take the fall for this." "I'm not taking the fall," he said. "I'm taking responsibility." Before she could argue, his phone buzzed. A call from Rachel. He stared at the screen for a moment, then answered. "Evan?" Her voice was calm but carried an undertone of worry. "It's all over the news. They're saying Nuracor's under investigation." He sighed. "They're exaggerating, but it's not good." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to come over tonight?" The simplicity of the question disarmed him. For a second, he forgot he was supposed to be the unshakable CEO, the man who never needed anything. Rachel, I don't want to bring my mess to your door." She didn't hesitate. "Evan, life's mess is the only thing we all have in common. Come by. I'll make dinner." For the first time in days, something inside him unclenched. That evening, he arrived at her apartment carrying a bottle of wine and more exhaustion than he could hide. Rachel opened the door, wearing a soft gray sweater and a look that said she'd already seen the worst life could offer, and still chose compassion. "You look like you haven't slept," she said, taking his coat. "I haven't," he admitted. Clara peeked out from behind the couch, holding a stack of drawings. "Mr. Evan, Mama says you're in trouble." Rachel laughed, mortified. "Clara!" Evan smiled faintly. "She's not wrong." Clara grinned. "Don't worry, I drew you something." She handed him a picture of a stick figure standing in front of a tall building, a storm cloud overhead, and a little girl holding out a scarf. Evan stared at it longer than he meant to. "You're a good artist, Clara." Rachel watched him quietly. "Sit down. Soup's almost ready." The table was small and slightly uneven, the light from a single lamp giving the room a golden glow. The scent of garlic and broth filled the air. Evan took a seat, his shoulders easing for the first time all week. "Smells amazing," he said. Rachel ladled soup into his bowl. "It's just chicken and potatoes. The secret ingredient is pretending it's better than it is." He smiled, taking a spoonful. "Then it's perfect." They ate in companionable silence until Rachel spoke. "You said you trusted him." Evan set his spoon down. "More than anyone. Miles was with me from the start. We used to work out of my garage. He came to my father's funeral." "What changed?" "Nothing," he said bitterly. "That's the problem. We both built the same company, but somewhere along the way I started building something else, a conscience. He didn't." Rachel nodded slowly. "Success is a mirror. It shows people what they really are." He looked at her, his voice lower now. "And what about you? What does success show you?" She smiled faintly. "That I've already won if my daughter grows up kind." Her answer settled between them like warmth spreading through the room. Evan leaned back, studying her. You ever wonder how two people living in the same city can see completely different worlds? All the time, she said softly. You see glass towers? I see the people cleaning under them. He exhaled, his throat tight. I don't deserve your kindness. Maybe not, she said gently, but you needed it. They sat in silence again, snow drifting past the window. Clara had fallen asleep on the couch, her scarf slipping to the floor. Evan bent to pick it up and folded it carefully beside her. When he looked up, Rachel was watching him. You can leave that here, she said quietly. You don't have to keep saving us. Evan met her gaze. That's not why I come here. She studied him for a moment. Then why? He hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. Because when I'm here, I remember what it feels like to matter. Rachel's breath caught. The air between them felt electric, fragile. Then Clara stirred, rolling over, and the moment passed. Rachel stood quickly, brushing a hand over her daughter's hair. You should get some rest, too, she said softly. He nodded, slipping on his coat. Thank you for dinner. Any time. Outside, the cold hit him instantly, but it didn't sting the way it usually did. Somewhere inside that tiny apartment, warmth existed, real and unpretending, and, for the first time, so. Evan realized it was the only thing he'd ever really wanted. When he reached his car, his phone buzzed again. A message from Mara. Urgent. Board meeting tomorrow. Possible suspension pending investigation. He stared at the screen, then at the falling snow. For once, he didn't feel afraid, because tonight, for reasons he couldn't yet explain, he believed he might survive this storm, not because of who he was, but because of who waited for him in that small, flickering apartment in Dorchester. The next morning, the storm inside Nuracor hit harder than any blizzard outside. Cameras swarmed the marble lobby, their flashes slicing through the cold light. News anchors camped near the revolving doors, shouting questions as employees hurried past. Mr. Drayton, did your COO embezzle funds? Are you stepping down? Has Nuracor lost public trust? Evan said nothing as security escorted him through the crowd. His expression was calm, his composure precise, but beneath the tailored suit and steady gaze, exhaustion had settled deep into his bones. Upstairs, the boardroom was filled before he even arrived. Every seat occupied, every face expectant. He could feel the tension before anyone spoke. The chairman cleared his throat. Evan, this is a difficult day. We're all aware of the allegations surrounding Miles Grant, but there's also concern about your oversight, your decision to delay reporting it. Evan nodded slowly. Because I needed to be certain. Miles wasn't just a colleague, he was family. Be that as it may, the chairman continued, the optics are disastrous. Investors are demanding reassurance. The board has voted, unanimously, to suspend you from operational duties pending an internal review. The words landed like a hammer. Evan didn't flinch, but the silence that followed pressed against him like the weight of a collapsing ceiling. Mara sat near the corner, her eyes wide with disbelief. You're sidelining him for finding the problem? The chairman avoided her gaze. We're protecting the company. Evan exhaled, long and steady. You don't have to explain. He stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate calm. If Nuracor's integrity depends on appearances, then maybe it never had any. He walked out before anyone could answer. The elevator ride down was slow, the kind of slow that gives you too much time to think. Every floor that passed reflected his face in the mirrored walls. Older, sharper, lonelier. Outside, the snow had started again. Fine, almost invisible flakes drifted through the wind, catching on his shoulders as he walked to his car. The press shouted his name, but their voices blurred into white noise. By the time he reached his apartment, the adrenaline had burned out, leaving only silence. He poured a glass of water, stared at it, then set it down untouched. His phone vibrated. A message from Rachel. Heard about the board. Soup's on if you need a place to breathe. He didn't think. He just drove. When she opened the door, he looked different. Less composed, more human. His hair was windblown, his jaw unshaven, his eyes hollow. Rachel didn't ask anything, she just stepped aside a bit. "Dinner's simple tonight," she said softly. "Lentil soup and grilled cheese." He managed a small smile. "Sounds like exactly what I need." He sank into the familiar couch, the warmth of the room wrapping around him. The lamplight painted everything in gold. Clara sat cross-legged on the floor, working on a jigsaw puzzle. When she saw him, her face brightened. "Mr. Evan, Mama said you're taking a break." He chuckled, voice hoarse. "Something like that." She climbed up beside him, pressing her tiny hand over his. "You look sad." Evan hesitated. "I guess I am." "Then you can borrow my scarf again," she said, untangling the gray-blue wool and looping it around his neck with serious concentration. The gesture hit him harder than any boardroom speech. He blinked fast, swallowing something that felt too heavy for words. "Thank you, Clara," he murmured. Rachel watched from the kitchen doorway, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Careful, she's starting to think she's your bodyguard." Evan looked at her. Maybe she is. They ate together in the quiet. The soup was simple, but it grounded him more than any fine meal ever had. Between bites, Rachel spoke softly. "You've been holding the world up for too long. Maybe it's okay to let it rest for a while." He stared at his bowl, the steam blurring his vision. "If I stop, everything I built could fall apart." "Maybe," she said, "or maybe it'll finally stand on its own." He looked up at her then, really looked. Her hair framed her face in soft waves, and her eyes carried that steady calm he couldn't seem to find in himself. "I don't know who I am without Nuracor," he admitted. She sat down across from him. "You're the man who listens when a frightened child speaks. The man who drove through a blizzard for people he didn't know. That's who you are, Evan. The rest is just noise." He leaned back, the weight in his chest finally loosening. "How do you always know what to say?" Rachel smiled faintly. "Because I've already lived through storms that tried to take everything from me. I just learned to stop letting them." For a while, they just sat there in the quiet hum of the heater, the snow falling steadily outside. Clara had fallen asleep again, her small hand resting on the scarf that now hung around Evan's neck. He looked at her and then at Rachel. "You've both done more for me than anyone in my world ever has." Rachel reached across the table and placed her hand gently over his. "Then maybe it's time you start living in ours." Evan met her gaze, the flicker of something warm passing between them, a connection born not from power, but from survival. Outside, the snow thickened, turning the city into a blur of white and silence. Inside, the warmth grew stronger, steadier. Evan didn't know what tomorrow would bring, the investigations, the headlines, the scrutiny, but sitting there, with Rachel's hand over his and Clara's scarf around his neck, he finally understood something profound. Sometimes the only way to weather the cold wasn't by standing taller. It was by sitting still beside someone who refused to leave. Snow pounded against the windows that night as if trying to break through. The blizzard had returned, dense, relentless, the kind that swallowed streetlights whole. In the soft glow of Rachel's apartment, the storm outside felt distant, almost unreal. Evan sat near the couch, Clara asleep under her scarf again. Rachel moved quietly in the small kitchen, washing dishes. The rhythm of her hands, the steady hum of the heater, and the faint whisper of wind created an unexpected peace. Then his phone buzzed. One glance at the screen shattered it. Breaking news. Nuracor data leak. Internal files exposed. CEO under fire. He froze, staring. The leak wasn't supposed to be possible. Nuracor's security protocols were his life's work. He opened the article, scrolling fast. Thousands of confidential documents had been released online, some personal, some corporate, some still marked as classified prototypes. At the bottom, one chilling line stood out. Anonymous source claims CEO Drayton covered insider collusion. He went pale. Rachel turned. Evan? He stood abruptly, voice tight. I have to go. What happened? There's been a breach, a massive one. Someone's trying to bury me. She grabbed his arm before he reached the door. You can't drive in that storm. I don't have a choice. Her grip tightened. Then you're not going alone. Minutes later, they were in his SUV, the world outside disappearing into sheets of white. The tires crunched over snow, the headlights slicing through the darkness. Who would do this? Rachel asked. Miles, he said through clenched teeth. He's trying to make it look like I was part of his scheme. He still has access to certain encrypted drives. God! He slammed a fist lightly against the steering wheel. He's not just stealing the company. He's taking everything I built. Rachel's hand brushed his shoulder gently. Then let someone help you. He exhaled shakily. That's the hardest thing for me to do. The drive to headquarters was nearly impossible. The wipers struggled against the weight of snow. The streets were nearly empty. When they finally pulled into the parking lot, the building loomed like a dark, frozen cathedral, its glass panels reflecting the storm's fury. Evan leapt out, shielding his face against the wind. Rachel followed, clutching her coat closed. Inside, the lobby was half-lit, the emergency power flickering. Mara met them near the elevators, coat still on, expression grim. It's bad. Half the network's offline. The leak's everywhere. The FBI just called. Evan's voice dropped. They think it's me, don't they? They don't know what to think, she said softly. But the board's in chaos. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. If I can access the source files, I can trace the breach, but I'll need the internal security logs from the week before Miles left. Mara nodded. I already pulled them. They're encrypted. I'll handle it, he said. Rachel stepped closer. Evan? If you've been targeted, then he left a trail. People like that always do. Her certainty steadied him. You really believe that? I've seen it too many times, she said. The truth always finds a way to breathe, even under ice. He logged into the secure terminal, fingers flying across the keyboard. Lines of code scrolled by faster than Rachel could follow. His face, usually so controlled, now showed every flicker of exhaustion and fury. Minutes turned to hours. The storm outside howled louder, thunder rolling over the frozen skyline. Rachel brought him coffee, stayed beside him, her presence wordless but grounding. Finally, the screen flashed. Access point identified. Evan leaned in. There. The terminal displayed a location marker, a hotel IP address from 3 weeks earlier. Rachel frowned. That's the Frostline Grand. Evan's pulse spiked. The same place where Clara warned me. He opened the next layer of data, and a playback file appeared, a digital audio recording flagged as corrupted. He tried to restore it. The speakers hissed, then crackled to life. A voice emerged, Miles's, speaking low, urgent, unmistakable. Everything's ready. Once Drayton's out, we push the files live. By the time he knows, he'll be finished. Evan froze. Rachel covered her mouth. You recorded him, she whispered. He shook his head. No, that's not my recording. It must have been. Her eyes widened. Clara? Evan stared. Clara? Rachel nodded slowly, realization dawning. She said she heard them at the cafe that morning, the men speaking Russian. She must have turned on the recording function on my phone when she got scared. I forgot to delete it. Evan blinked, stunned. That file? Rachel, that file just saved me. They stared at each other, the truth settling between them like light breaking through clouds. The room seemed to exhale. Mara covered her mouth. This is enough to clear you completely. Evan's shoulders sagged. For the first time in days, his heartbeat slowed. He looked at Rachel, his voice rough. You just saved my life. Again. She smiled faintly. No, she did. Outside, the storm raged on. wind tearing past the glass like the world itself was being rewritten. But inside that flickering lobby, something unshakable formed, a quiet, powerful bond between three lives that had collided by chance and now refused to come undone. Evan stared at the scarf Rachel still wore, the same gray-blue wool that had followed every turning point in his life. It wasn't just a symbol anymore. It was a lifeline. He turned toward her, the storm's reflection in his eyes. "When this is over," he said softly, "I'm not walking away again." Rachel looked at him, steady, knowing, unafraid. "Then don't." The blizzard roared, shaking the tower, but for once Evan didn't feel the cold. He felt the warmth of survival, of truth, of finally not being alone. The city woke under white silence, the kind that follows a storm that's taken everything it can. Boston's skyline glittered beneath a pale sunrise. Roads were impassable, trees bent under the weight of ice, and yet, for the first time in weeks, Evan Drayton could breathe. He had spent the night at Nuracore, not in his office, but in the operations room, side by side with Rachel and Mara, untangling the mess Miles Grant had left behind. The audio file Rachel's phone captured had done more than clear his name. It had become evidence in a federal case. By dawn, the story had broken across every network. COO behind massive data leak. Nuracore CEO cleared of wrongdoing. Evan's face was everywhere, but this time the headlines weren't about power or profit. They were about truth. He stood near the glass wall overlooking the harbor, the morning light cutting across his face. Rachel was asleep on the couch, wrapped in her coat, Clara's gray-blue scarf draped over her shoulders. Even exhausted, she looked peaceful. Mara stepped in quietly. The FBI's confirmed the arrest. Miles tried to leave the state. They caught him near Worcester. Evan nodded, his voice soft. "Good. You should rest." He shook his head. "I'll rest when the company's back on its feet." Mara smiled faintly. "You mean when you're back on yours?" He looked at her, one corner of his mouth lifting. "Maybe both." She lingered for a moment, then said, "That woman, Rachel, she's good for you." Evan turned toward the sleeping figure on the couch. "She reminded me that people can still mean more than numbers." Mara nodded once, then left him alone. Evan crossed the room quietly and knelt beside the couch. The scarf slipped slightly, and he adjusted it gently around Rachel's shoulders. Her eyelids fluttered open. "Morning," she whispered, voice rough from sleep. "Morning," he said. "You should have gone home." She smiled faintly. "And miss the part where you clear your name? Not a chance." He laughed softly, then sat beside her. "They arrested him. It's over." Rachel's expression shifted, relief mixed with something bittersweet. "So, what happens now?" He looked toward the window, where sunlight began to melt the ice. "Now, I start again, but differently this time." "How differently?" Evan turned to her. "No more boardrooms built on fear. No more walls between the people who work for me and the people I'm supposed to serve. Nuracore was built to predict the future. I think it's time it started protecting it instead." She studied him quietly. "You really mean that?" "I do." Rachel looked down at her hands. "You're not who I expected a CEO to be." He smiled faintly. "Neither am I." Before she could reply, a soft yawn came from across the room. Clara blinked sleepily, rubbing her eyes. "Mama? Mr. Evan?" Rachel reached out, pulling her daughter close. "It's okay, sweetheart. Everything's fine now." Clara looked up at him with sleepy seriousness. "Did the bad man go away?" "He did," Evan said gently. "You helped make that happen." Her eyes widened. "Really?" "Really," he said, smiling. "You and that scarf of yours seem to bring a lot of good luck." Clara giggled and tugged the scarf tighter around her. "Mama says it's because Grandma's love is inside it." Rachel brushed a tear from her daughter's cheek. "And maybe a little courage, too." Evan felt something catch in his chest. He had spent years creating machines that could see patterns in chaos, but he'd never seen a clearer one than this. The way love, courage, and truth kept finding each other even through the snow. Later that morning, he stood before the press outside Nuracore Tower. Cameras flashed, questions fired, but his statement was brief. "This company isn't built by code or by me. It's built by people who still believe in doing what's right, even when no one's watching. And sometimes the greatest heroes don't sit in boardrooms. Sometimes they're 7 years old and brave enough to speak." The applause was quiet at first, then grew. Evan glanced toward the side of the crowd where Rachel and Clara stood. Clara waved shyly, her scarf bright against the winter white. That night, as the last of the snow melted into slush along the harbor, Evan drove to Dorchester one final time. Not to thank them, not to repay them, but to belong. Rachel opened the door before he even knocked, the faint smell of soup and candle wax filling the air. "You didn't have to come," she said. He smiled softly. "I told you, I'm done walking away." She hesitated, eyes flicking to the gray-blue scarf draped around his shoulders. "You kept it?" He nodded. "Borrowed it, until I earned something that warm on my own." Rachel stepped aside, the same quiet grace she'd had from the start. "Then come in. We were just starting dinner." Inside, Clara beamed. "Mr. Evan, you can sit next to me." He laughed. "That's a hard offer to refuse." They ate together, the storm finally gone, the world outside wrapped in calm. Somewhere in the middle of laughter and clinking spoons, Evan looked across the table at Rachel. The glow from the window cast light across her face, and in that instant he knew. This wasn't charity. This wasn't guilt. It was home. When dinner ended, Rachel walked him to the door. Snow was falling again, light, quiet, harmless. Evan reached for her hand. "I don't want to just visit anymore," he said softly. "I want to stay." Rachel's eyes glistened, her breath visible in the cold. "Then stay." Clara peeked from behind her mother, smiling so wide it almost hurt. "Does that mean you're family now?" Evan knelt, his voice warm. "If you'll have me." Clara nodded solemnly. "You already are." The wind outside shifted, carrying the faint scent of snow and salt from the harbor. Evan looked up at Rachel, the city lights catching in her eyes. He whispered, "I used to think success meant never falling. Now I know. It means having someone to catch you when you do." Rachel smiled, the scarf's fringe brushing her wrist. "Then I guess we both succeeded." And when Evan leaned forward and kissed her beneath the falling snow, the world outside finally felt still, like every storm had led here, to this moment, to this warmth that refused to fade. The year turned quietly. Boston thawed, one snowbank at a time, and by the time the first crocuses broke through the icy ground, life had found its rhythm again. The world moved on from the scandal. Nuracore recovered faster than anyone predicted. Investors returned. Trust rebuilt itself in small, deliberate steps. But Evan didn't return to his penthouse. He'd packed it up one weekend in February, trading his panoramic view of the harbor for the smaller, humbler comfort of Dorchester. Rachel tried to argue, but she smiled when she realized she was losing that fight before it even began. He worked fewer hours now, spending mornings at the office, evenings in their apartment, and weekends helping Clara with school projects. The sound of her laughter had become the metronome of his days. Steady, grounding, real. On a chilly Saturday in early March, Evan stood at the community center near the waterfront. Children filled the room, their coats dripping with melted snow. A banner hung above the stage. The Clara Ellis Initiative. Building bridges through language. Rachel stood beside him, holding a clipboard, trying not to look overwhelmed as the mayor shook her hand. "This program's already making waves," the mayor said warmly. "Boston could use more heroes like your daughter." Rachel laughed softly, brushing hair from her face. "Clara's the brave one. We just follow where she leads." Evan glanced across the room where Clara stood on a chair, helping hang paper snowflakes from the ceiling. The same gray-blue scarf was looped around her neck, clean now, mended at the corners but still frayed where it had once torn. She waved at him, proud and fearless. "She's not afraid of anything anymore," Rachel said quietly. Evan smiled. "She never really was. She just needed the world to listen." Later, when the crowd thinned and the last of the cocoa cups were cleared away, Evan and Rachel stepped outside. The air carried that late winter bite, sharp but no longer cruel. The streets glistened under lamplight, puddles reflecting streaks of silver. Rachel slipped her hands into her coat pockets. "You know, I still can't believe all this started with a scarf and a snowstorm." Evan laughed softly. "And a girl who refused to let me get on an elevator." They walked in comfortable silence for a while. The city around them felt gentler now, less about speed, more about breath. When they reached the corner, Evan stopped. "You remember what your father's engraving said? Keep time, find home." Rachel looked up, smiling faintly. "Of course. He used to tell me it meant every storm has a rhythm. If you can keep your heart steady through it, you'll always find your way back." Evan took her hand, his voice quiet. "You and Clara kept time for me, when I'd forgotten how." Rachel's eyes glistened. "And did you find home?" He nodded slowly. "I think I've been standing in it all along." They reached her building, the same one where this all began. The chipped stairwell, the flickering light, the window where the scarf had once hung to dry. But tonight, it didn't look tired. It looked alive, like a beacon against the dark. Inside, Clara was sprawled on the couch, drawing again. She looked up and grinned. "Mama! Mr. Evan! You're late!" Evan ruffled her hair. "I thought heroes got to be fashionably late." She giggled. "You're not a hero. You're my boss." Rachel laughed from the doorway. "Out of the mouths of babes." Evan raised his hands in surrender. "She's not wrong." They ate dinner together, nothing fancy, just soup and fresh bread. But as the snow began to fall again, soft and slow, Evan felt something stir in his chest, the same quiet awe he'd felt that first night he'd found them in the storm. Clara leaned against him, her eyes half closed. "It's snowing again." He nodded. "Boston's reminding us where it all began." Rachel smiled, resting her chin on her hand, and where it all changed. For a long moment, no one spoke. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the window, catching in the streetlight like tiny sparks of memory. Inside, warmth filled the room, steady, lasting, real. Evan reached into his pocket and unfolded a small piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. Clara's drawing from months before. 3 stick figures under falling snow, bound together by a scarf. He set it on the table, smoothing it flat. "You know," he said softly, "I think this is still my favorite design." Rachel looked at it, then at him. "Mine too." As the snow deepened outside, Evan rose and walked to the window. The city's reflection shimmered against the glass, bright and full of life. He could see the 3 of them faintly mirrored there, a man, a woman, a child, together against the cold. He turned back toward them, his voice warm. "The storm took everything I thought mattered, but it gave me what I didn't know I was missing." Rachel reached over, brushing a bit of snow from his sleeve. "What's that?" He smiled, eyes bright beneath the soft light. "Reason to stay." And as the night closed around them, gentle, forgiving, infinite, the gray-blue scarf hung from the back of Clara's chair, its frayed ends swaying lightly in the warmth, like the last echo of a winter finally letting go.